I was born into a world where dominance ruled all, yet I possessed none. Sheltered and compliant, I spent 22 years hidden behind walls constructed by my father, the infamous Vincenzo Rinaldi. He claimed it was protection, but now I understand. He was shielding me from the truth, from the world, and especially from him, Matteo De Luca, the man I was forced to marry, the man who wears revenge like a tailored suit. My father's nemesis, now my husband. He gazes at me like he plans to break me, and maybe he will, but behind the cold fury in his eyes, there's something fractured, something that resonates with the fire buried deep within me. I thought I was marrying a monster, thought I was just a pawn in a bloody feud, but I was wrong. The lies run deeper than blood, the truth more savage than betrayal, and the man I should fear might be the only one capable of saving or destroying me. In this realm of feuding kings, untouched brides, and perilous secrets, love is no fairy tale, it's war. I always believed silence was safer than truth. In my world, truth costs lives. I learned that early, in the way my father's voice would drop into warning tones when I asked about his work, in the silent men with weapons outside our estate in Amalfi, and in the way I was hidden, kept like a porcelain doll in a locked glass case immaculate, admired but ultimately voiceless. There was no omen the morning my life changed. The sun streamed gold through the silk curtains of my bedroom, and I had just opened a worn novel with a cup of jasmine tea when the knock came firm, deliberate. Marcella, my father's housekeeper, appeared. "Your father wants to see you." Now, I was startled. Vincenzo rarely summoned me, unless it was to parade me in designer gowns at some banquet. I smoothed my pale rose dress and walked in silence past armed men in suits and judgmental eyes of saints hanging on the walls. When I entered his study, the door shut behind me with a sound that felt like a verdict. Vincenzo Rinaldi stood behind, his oak desk like a sculpture of power unmoving, stern, commanding. Two men I didn't recognize stood flanking him, sharp in tailored suits. "Gianna," he said, motioning for me to sit. His voice was smoke and steel. I obeyed, fingers clasped tightly in my lap. "You're going to be married," he said without ceremony. The words landed like a slap. "To Matteo De Luca," he continued, as if speaking of the weather. My breath caught. Everyone in our world knew of Matteo, head of the De Luca syndicate, since his brother's suspicious death. Ruthless, untouchable, and most importantly, our sworn enemy. I stared at my father, disbelief boiling into fear. "You want me to marry our rival? It's done. A blood truce. Your purity will seal it." My stomach churned. This wasn't about love or even power, it was barter. "No," I whispered. "You can't." "I can and I have," he snapped. "You've lived in luxury while others bled for our name. You owe us your loyalty." "I'm not currency," I shouted. "You kept me locked away, and now you're giving me to someone who probably wants your head." His eyes darkened. "Matteo doesn't want peace, he wants leverage. This marriage gives him both. And you'll finally be useful." My eyes stung, but I didn't cry. "What if I refuse?" He leaned in. "Do you remember your piano tutor, Alessia? She ran with secrets. Her car exploded 2 days later." I gasped. "You told me it was an accident." "Not all accidents are," he said coldly. "Now sit." I collapsed into the chair. My father had made people vanish, but turning that cruelty on me shattered what little faith I had left. "You'll marry this weekend. You'll wear white. You'll smile." "Does he even want this?" He agreed. "That's enough." I don't remember how I got back to my room. The tea was cold, the book untouched, and the city outside unaware of the prison closing in around me. The days blurred. Seamstresses came and went. Lace dresses were fitted, jewels selected, my mother's veil unpacked. No one asked what I wanted. I didn't see Vincenzo again. When the wedding arrived, I was dressed in white lace, hair swept back, a diamond pendant nestled at my collarbone. I looked like a storybook bride but felt like a shadow. The ceremony took place in a private chapel dimly lit, guarded by men with concealed weapons. I saw Matteo before I felt anything. He stood at the altar, dark-haired, tall, with eyes like frost and a suit darker than dusk. He didn't smile. When I reached him, he didn't offer his hand. The vows felt like a sentence, each word weightier than the last. I said I do with my mouth, but inside I was screaming. There was no celebration afterward, only silence. We drove to the De Luca estate, sprawling and austere, and once inside, he dismissed the staff and showed me to a grand room. "You'll stay here, don't leave. My men have orders." "You don't have to treat me like a prisoner," I said. "I'm not," he replied. "You're a liability." "Then why marry me?" I asked. His gaze hardened. "Because your father stole from me. Now I've taken what he valued most." My heart sank. I wasn't a wife. I was vengeance sewn in silk. When the door closed behind him, I sat on the edge of the bed, stripped of everything I once knew, and made myself a silent vow. I would not survive this by being the girl they raised. I would become something else. Something stronger. Because Matteo De Luca thought he'd claimed a virgin bride, but he had no idea he'd just married a storm. I stepped closer to him, needing him to see I wouldn't be cowed. "You talk about control, but do you really think this makes you powerful? Forcing a woman to marry you, just to make a point." His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "I didn't force you. Your father did. I just accepted the gift." I inhaled sharply, fighting the sting behind my eyes. I wouldn't cry, not in front of him, not tonight. So what now? I asked. "You parade me around like your trophy? Or do you just keep me here like a hostage until you're bored?" "You'll be presented at the De Luca family estate tomorrow. After that, you'll attend functions when I say so. Smile when it suits me and keep your head down." "And what about us?" I asked, the words foreign on my tongue. He didn't blink. "There is no us. We're married by paper, not by love. I'm not interested in playing house." His words cut through me like frost. Part of me had feared he'd try to consummate our marriage. Another part had, with guilty curiosity, wondered what it would be like to be touched by a man like him. "Why?" "The virginity clause," I asked bitterly. "Why make a point of marrying someone pure if you don't even intend to touch her?" His gaze shifted sharp, surgical. "Because power isn't always about taking. Sometimes it's about possessing what no one else can. Your purity is a symbol, not for me, for them, for your father, for the world." I wanted to scream, slap him, run, but I stood still, chin high, breath steady, unwilling to let him see how deeply his words wounded me. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Sleep well, Mrs. De Luca." He left without another word, the door clicking shut like the end of a sentence I hadn't agreed to. I stood in the room, heart pounding, fists trembling. I wasn't broken yet, but I was no longer the same. This was no longer just about survival. This was about evolution. I wouldn't be his pawn. I wouldn't be my father's leverage. I wouldn't remain some holy symbol while men used my body for strategy. I walked to the mirror, stared into my own eyes, and made a vow. If I was going to live in this world, I'd learn its rules, then break every one. I woke to a room drenched in soft light with no warmth. The sun trickled through the curtains like a beautiful lie. For a moment, I kept my eyes shut, praying I'd wake in my old bed, in a life that made sense. But reality seeped in lavender-scented sheets, a silk robe I didn't pick, and a last name that no longer belonged to me. Of course he wasn't there. Matteo De Luca hadn't touched me since the wedding day, and I didn't know if that was mercy or another form of control. I sat up slowly, combed my fingers through my hair, and took in the pristine, curated, soulless bedroom. Everything in its place. as if the house itself had been taught discipline. I cleaned myself with robotic efficiency. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried since the wedding, not because I lacked the tears, but because I refused to give this gilded cage more of me than it had already stolen. When I returned, breakfast sat untouched on a tray: fresh fruit, croissants, tea brewed just right. I forced myself to eat. Hunger wouldn't win this war. Strength would. Afterward, I wandered the estate. No one stopped me. No one spoke. I couldn't tell if I was free or simply monitored by unseen eyes. The halls stretched endlessly, lined with art, sculpture, marble that echoed my steps. I gravitated toward an unexplored wing. One door at the corridor's end sat slightly ajar, the only one not sealed tight. Something pulled me inside. It was a study, unlike my father's lived in, real. The books were red, the desk cluttered, a laptop still warm. Above the desk hung a black and white photograph of a young man who resembled Matteo Softer somehow. The inscription read, Luca de Luca, 1985 to 2018, his brother. The one whose death started all of this. I stared, wondering if I was the ghost. Matteo saw every time he looked at me. I turned away, my gaze catching on a half-open filing cabinet. Inside were manila folders, names scrawled across the tabs. I found mine. I shouldn't have, but I opened it. Photos, documents, birth records. One caught my eye: a birth certificate. Mine, but something was off. The father's name was blank. The mother, Selena Varela, a name I'd never heard. My breath caught. I'd been told my mother died giving birth, married to my father. But this certificate told a different story. Another letter typed, signed, dated 22 years ago, outlined adoption, protective custody, legal guardianship. Was I adopted? My knees weakened. Had my life been a fabrication built by Vincenzo Rinaldi? Why had he lied? Who had my mother really been? I returned everything, shaken. I left the study quickly, heart thundering, mind racing. In my room, I locked the door behind me and felt like a stranger in my own story. That afternoon, Matteo returned. I heard his steps before I saw him. He knocked once and entered without waiting. Sharp suit, blank expression. You left your wing, he said. Not a question. I explored your study, I replied, calm. If I'm to be locked in this house, I should know its halls. His jaw tightened, but he didn't raise his voice. What did you see? I nearly lied. But I was done lying. Enough to know I'm not who I thought I was. Those files weren't for you. They're about me. I have a right to know. You have a right to survive, he said, cutting. Digging into the past will only burn you. Then tell me the truth. Who was my mother? Was I adopted? He turned away. That's not my truth to give. Then whose? The man who handed me over. Do you like property? He looked back at me, unflinching. He didn't sell you. He bought time. I blinked against the tears that tried to rise. Feels the same. He studied me, then walked to the door. If you want to survive this world, Gianna, learn one thing. Secrets are more dangerous than bullets. And then he was gone. I stood there. Fists clenched, rage curling inside me like smoke. Everything I believed was cracking, and beneath the surface was a truth I wasn't sure I was ready for. But I would find it ready or not. The silence in the De Luca estate pressed into me like armor turned prison. I'd grown up surrounded by quiet, but this silence wasn't comforting. It was surveillance. I hadn't left my room since the study, not because I was afraid, but because I needed time to think, to strip away what I'd been told and see what was left. Matteo and I hadn't spoken in 3 days. We existed like ghosts in separate wings. But even his absence was presence. The scent of his cologne. The fresh roses that appeared like clockwork. The memory of him staring into the courtyard like he was grieving something no one could see. I didn't know what was worse, being married to a stranger or realizing that stranger might never see me as more than collateral. But the cruelest truth? I wasn't indifferent. I wanted to hate him, but curiosity lingered. There was something in his silence that dared me to look deeper. By late afternoon, I left my room again. The sky was soft blue, the kind of color that only came before dusk. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and let my steps wander. The house was quiet, too quiet. No chatter, no movement, just the echo of my own footsteps. As I approached the grand sitting room, faint music, classical, sorrowful, drifted from the balcony. I followed the sound, breath catching in my throat as I stepped outside. Instead, I found Matteo. He stood at the edge of the balcony, his back to me, one hand resting lightly on the stone railing. His jacket was gone, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marred with faint scars, and a silver watch that caught the dying sunlight like a shard of ice. For a moment, I thought about leaving. He hadn't noticed me yet. I could disappear back into my solitude. But something rooted me there. He spoke without turning. You walk quietly. I almost didn't hear you. I swallowed, unsure. I didn't mean to interrupt. You didn't, he replied. I just come out here to think. I stepped closer, cautious but compelled. About what? He turned to face me then, his eyes catching mine with that same intense scrutiny I'd come to expect. Things I can't change. Mistakes, dead brothers. There was no bitterness in his voice, only the kind of fatigue born from carrying too much grief for too long. I saw the photo in your study, I said softly. Your brother? His jaw flexed. He was dangerous not because he wanted to be, but because he had to be. What happened to him? I asked gently, not sure if I had crossed a line. He looked toward the horizon. He trusted the wrong people, was betrayed. A deal went bad. He never came home. I studied his profile, the way pain sat just beneath the surface of his skin. And you think my father had something to do with it? I don't think, he said. I know. The silence between us was heavy, broken only by the wind and the things neither of us dared say aloud. I didn't know how to defend the man I had begun questioning myself. I didn't even know what truth meant anymore, not since I found the birth certificate buried in his files, the one that listed my father as unknown. I found something, I said quietly. My birth record, it doesn't name him. And it names a woman I don't know. Matteo's eyes narrowed slightly. You weren't supposed to see that. Why? I asked. Because it changes how useful I am to you. He moved toward me with slow precision. No, he said. Because it puts you in danger. There are people who would kill to keep that truth buried. My pulse quickened, but I didn't step back. Then tell me what I am. You're Gianna, he said. A piece on a board neither of us created. And right now, you're standing in front of the only person willing to protect you when it all crumbles. It wasn't love, not even trust, but it was something real, something human. Why protect me? I asked. You don't even like me. He moved even closer. I could smell the faint scent of smoke and spice clinging to his skin. Liking you has nothing to do with it. Then, without warning, he reached up and brushed a strand of hair from my cheek. His fingers were warm, rough, lived in. My breath caught. It wasn't romantic, but it was real. You were supposed to be the weapon I used against your father, he murmured. But you're something else entirely. You don't even know me, I said. I know enough, he answered. You're not weak. You're not naive. And you're braver than most men I've met. His touch fell away, and I felt its absence like a bruise. Don't mistake this for kindness, he added. There's no kindness in this world, only moments. This is one of them. Then he left me there, the fading sun casting shadows across the balcony, the truth of us settling like dust. That night I dreamed of him, of that quiet touch and the way his voice had wrapped around me like silk dipped in steel. I woke with his words echoing in my chest. There was no softness between us, but there was an understanding, a truce. That morning, I didn't wait for permission. Something between us had cracked open, and whatever boundaries once stood had begun to erode. I wandered the halls with new eyes and a steadier step. I passed his voice behind a door low, unreadable. I didn't stop. I had a destination. The study was locked now as I expected, but a key waited in the drawer of a console table. Men, like Matteo, were precise, but they weren't infallible. I stepped in and shut the door behind me, heading straight for the cabinet. I searched for the folder I'd seen only once: Caterina Bianchi, my mother. I didn't know what I'd find, but what I uncovered overwhelmed me. The folder was thick, full of fading photographs and old letters. She was beautiful, dark hair, sharp eyes, and a strength I could almost feel through the paper. In one photo, she held a baby me wrapped in pink, eyes wide and innocent. But it was another photo that stole my breath. Her, beside a man who wasn't Salvatore. A young man with dark hair and eyes like Matteo's. The back was dated September 2002, my birth month. Beneath it, a letter. The handwriting shook, ink blurred in places. If anything happens to me, protect her. She's not safe in their hands. They want her for leverage, but she is more than blood. She is the last piece of him left. You owe me. Please, Salvatore, keep her hidden, keep her safe. It wasn't signed. But I knew it was hers, and I knew who he was. The man in the photo, Luca. De Luca, Matteo's brother, my real father. The truth was no longer a theory, it was real. My life had been built on obligation, not love. I was a favor, a secret, a tool. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just held the folder until my hands went numb. When I turned, Matteo stood in the doorway. This time, I didn't flinch. I didn't hide the folder. You locked it, I said. Not very well. He stepped inside. You found what you were looking for. Part of it, I replied. You knew. Yes. And you said nothing. It wasn't my story to tell. But it was my life, I snapped. You could have warned me, prepared me. For what? He asked. To find out your father lied? That you were born of a love that became a death sentence? Yes, I whispered. I had the right to know. His voice dropped. And now you do. You've lived behind silk curtains and silver spoons. But now you've seen the world. For what it is. I'm not the same girl anymore, I said. No, he agreed. You're not. The pause between us held everything: grief, history, blood. Who was he? I asked. The man with my mother. Matteo's jaw tensed. My brother, Luca. My heart froze. That makes me my niece, he finished. By blood, but not by life. We were strangers until this. I sank onto the edge of the desk. I don't know what to do with this. You decide. Who you are now, he said. No one else. I'm still your wife, I murmured, even if that makes everything twisted. He came closer. I never meant to feel anything for you. But you do, I said. He didn't deny it. His hand rose again, his thumb brushing the edge of my jaw. I leaned into it. Not because I forgave him, but because it felt human. I married you for revenge, he said. Now, I don't know what I'm keeping you for. Maybe I'm not here to be kept, I whispered. Maybe you're not, he answered. There were no promises. Just a raw moment of truth between two people made from pain and legacy, standing in the ruins of what they once believed. And somehow it felt like the beginning of something honest. I stayed in my room for a while, reading through old journals my mother had left behind in the folder. Her handwriting was delicate but strong. She wrote about Luca, often how he made her feel safe in a world that never was, how she dreamed of a life far from the violence, but knew it would never come. There were no fairy tales in her words, only truth and love, a love that got her killed. By the time evening arrived, I felt like I had aged 5 years in a single day. The dress Matteo's staff had laid out for me was midnight blue velvet, with a plunging neckline and an open back. I stared at it for a long time before slipping it on. If I had to play a part, I would wear it with dignity. Let them stare, let them whisper, I wouldn't shrink. When Matteo saw me, his expression didn't shift, but his eyes did. They darkened just slightly, a flicker of something I couldn't name. "You look the part," he said. I wasn't. Aware I had a role, I replied, smoothing the fabric over my hips. "You always had one," he said. "You just didn't know the script." The ride to the D'Amico estate was long and silent, tension draped between us like a veil. I sat beside Matteo in the back of his black car, the city lights flashing across the windows like fireflies trapped in crystal. He didn't speak, and neither did I. There was something sacred in the silence now, not peaceful, but necessary. Words had grown too sharp. The D'Amico estate was exactly what I expected. Towering marble columns, wrought iron gates, chandeliers that looked like they'd witnessed empires rise and fall. The guards nodded as Matteo stepped out, then offered a hand to help me down. His touch was brief, but it lingered longer than I cared to admit. Inside, the room was filled with people cloaked in black and silver, their smiles precise and their stares even sharper. When they saw him, the air shifted. When they saw me, it changed again, curiosity, suspicion, calculation. I felt it cling to my skin like smoke. We moved through the crowd, close but not touching, tethered without chains. A man with silver hair approached, voice slick with false warmth. "De Luca," he said, "you clean up well." "So do you, D'Amico," Matteo replied smoothly. "Didn't think you were celebrating after what happened at the port. Business goes on." "Blood dries," D'Amico said, then turned to me. "And this must be your new acquisition." The word struck like a slap. "She has a name," Matteo said, calm and cutting. "Gianna." D'Amico arched a brow, amused. "My apologies. You're quite the mystery. I expected someone more jaded. I was taught to keep my thoughts private," I said. "A wise woman," he murmured. Matteo's hand touched the small of my back, guiding me away before more could be said. We passed through stares and murmurs, but I kept my chin lifted. I was here, I was seen, and they would remember me whether they wanted to or not. As the evening went on, I realized power here wasn't measured in threats, but in glances and carefully timed silences. Matteo was masterful, gliding through the storm like a blade dressed in silk. And in that moment, I saw it I could be that. Too, I stayed close to him, not out of duty, but because he was my shield. Whenever someone tried to corner me, an older man with 2 slick words, a woman whose smile hid knives, Matteo was there, steering them away with a glance. He didn't touch me, but I felt held. I began to see the rhythm, the fake laughter, the weaponized politeness, the theater of loyalty. Power moved like smoke, subtle, invasive. And I was learning to see its shape. When he stepped away to speak, with one of the underbosses, I found myself near a golden stallion sculpture. That's when a stranger approached, holding a glass of something amber. "You're the girl," he said like he was addressing a legend. "The Rinaldi daughter who married the lion." I didn't react. Silence was a shield. "I knew your father," he added. "He wasn't the type to give away blood unless he had no other choice. What did De Luca pay for you?" "Enough," I said. He circled me like a bidder at auction. "They say you're not even Rinaldi's real daughter. A Bianchi, isn't that right?" My breath caught, but I held his gaze. "I'm Gianna De Luca. Whoever I was before doesn't matter." He smiled coldly. "Smart girl. Men like De Luca only keep women who are useful or obedient. Let's hope you're both." I wanted to slap him, but instead I asked, "Is that how your wife survived you?" His smile faltered, just a flicker. Then Matteo returned, stepping between us with a calm that felt lethal. "Vincent," he said, "weren't you banned from these events?" "New alliances, old hands," Vincent smirked. "Then finish your drink. It's your last," Matteo replied. Vincent turned without another word. "Did he touch you?" Matteo asked. "No, just reminded me that truth travels fast." "Then, let them watch," he said. He guided me to a quieter corner beneath a tall window overlooking the garden, the air laced with jasmine and threat. "Why am I really here?" I asked. "You know why," he said. "No, not the politics. Not the compuso. Performance. Why did you want me seen tonight?" He looked at me then, like really looked. "Because there are men here who still think you're a girl they can manipulate. I needed them to see what you've become." "What have I become?" I asked. "A De Luca," he said. It was more than a name. It was a reckoning, and he was right. I had changed. Later that night, we returned home, but I didn't go to my room. I followed him to his study. He didn't stop me. He poured a drink, loosened his tie, and sank into the chair behind his desk. I watched him, then asked, "Do you miss your brother?" "Every day. Would he hate what you've become?" "No," he said. "He'd understand why. And my mother? Do you think she'd know me now? She'd be proud." I sat across from him. Vincent was right. "I'm not Rinaldi's daughter. I don't owe him anything." "You don't," Matteo agreed. "But I don't owe you either." "Not yet," he said. A truth passed between us then, fragile, real. I left without another word and stood at my window, staring at stars too still for a world so broken. I thought of Caterina and Luca, of the war they tried to escape and the child left behind. I thought of Matteo and the strange way we were unraveling beside each other. This marriage began with chains, but something was shifting. Not love, not yet, but something more dangerous. Choice. I woke the next morning not with fear, but with clarity. Not peace, but acceptance. The estate moved with its usual rhythm. But I walked differently. The guards still glanced. The staff still avoided eye contact, but I met every gaze and didn't blink. I found Matteo in the training courtyard, shirt damp, fists wrapped, striking a punching bag with measured violence. Each blow was precise, not sloppy controlled rage. I watched him for a while before stepping forward. "You do this every morning?" I asked. "When I need to think." "Does it help?" "Sometimes." "You know what's strange?" I said. "I used to imagine men like you were monsters, cold, cruel, but watching you now, you don't look like a monster." He stopped. "What do I look like?" "Tired," I said, "and angry." He laughed, the sound low. "That's probably the most honest thing anyone said to me in years." I stepped closer. "I want to ask something. No lies. Why me? Why did it have to be me?" His eyes flickered. "Because taking you was the only way to hurt Rinaldi without pulling a trigger. He hid you, protected you. You were his greatest secret. So I took the secret." "That's not an answer," I said. "That's a tactic." He looked at me, really looked. "I took you because you were leverage. But I kept you because you didn't break. Because you stood up to me, even when you were afraid. Somewhere along the line, I stopped seeing you as a weapon." My chest tightened. "So what now?" I asked. "We pretend this is normal?" "Nothing is normal," he said. "But it's real now. That's the choice. We destroy each other or learn how to survive together." That day, I asked to go into town. He offered guards. I declined. I dressed in black jeans and a plain blouse, hair tied back, and walked the streets like I belonged, because maybe finally I did. I listened to vendors argue about fish prices and watched children chase each other around the stalls. It was loud, chaotic, beautiful in its simplicity. For a while I just breathed, no title, no bloodline, just Gianna. But even in the noise, I felt the eyes. People recognized me, not by name, but by presence. A woman like me didn't blend. I carried too much weight in my gaze, too much caution in my spine. In a small bookstore tucked between a pastry shop and a flower stall, I found a copy of a poetry collection I had loved as a teenager. I flipped through the worn pages, smiling faintly at the underlined verses. I had marked the same lines in my copy back home. I bought it, and the owner, a kind old woman with a bent back and ink-stained fingers, looked at me a moment too long before saying, "You've got storm in your eyes, girl." But not everyone who brings rain is meant to destroy. I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled and left with the book tucked under my arm. When I returned to the estate, Matteo was in the courtyard again, fully dressed this time, pacing, with a phone pressed to his ear. His voice was sharp but not raised. "No, if he wants to renegotiate terms, he does it face to face. I don't make promises over the phone." He ended the call and looked at me. "You went out without protection." "I went out as myself," I corrected. "That's not safe." "Neither is being locked in a house with someone I barely trust," I replied. His jaw tightened, but then he nodded. "Fair." I stepped past him, not in defiance, but in quiet reclamation. I was no longer the trembling girl who had arrived with resentment and fear. I was something else now, something forged from fire, truths, and lies. That night, I sat in the study alone and opened the poetry book. One line stayed with me longer than the rest. "There are no delicate survivors." And I realized I didn't want to be delicate anymore.